Okay.
All right. Welcome to the call, everyone. My name is Roy. I'm with Malmberg Group and the Investment Hub. And today we're co-hosting a presentation with Pepex Biomedical. And they currently hold more than 300 patents. They've developed biochemical sensors that can detect 800 plus unique biomarkers, including COVID-19, sepsis, HIV, Ebola, Hepatitis, and other antigens. And I would say their technology really represents a giant leap forward. And it's exciting that we have this presentation. A lot of time and investment have culminated in this. And they're now looking to commercialize the technology via two routes. One, a diagnostic blood glucose measuring system, and then second, a self-administered COVID-19 antigen and antibody test. And with us on the call, we've got Pepex Biomedical, the team. And if you have any questions during the call, just write them in the chat, and then we can answer them throughout the presentation. Or alternatively, if Pepex prefer, we can do it towards the end as well. With that said, I'll pass it over to Patrick. You want to introduce yourself?
This is Patrick Doherty, Chief Information Officer.
Yeah, so this is Paul Danner. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Pepex Biomedical. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. We're eager to present our project to everyone. And I'd like to start off by introducing the members of our team that are going to present today. Besides myself, you'll hear from Joseph Driver, who's our Chief Financial Officer, Dr. Stephen Bupp, who is our Medical Director, and Patrick Doherty, who you just heard his voice a moment ago, as our Chief Information Officer. Although the four of us will be presenting today, I want everyone to know that other members of our leadership team are in attendance on the with the meeting. Our Chief Scientist, Dr. Wojciech Swoboda, is with us. Steve Habrick, who is our Chief Operating Officer, is with us. And Marissa Pastoriza, that is our in charge of our regulatory affairs with the FDA, and not last but not least, Dr. Nathan Long, who is one of the founders of Pepex and was instrumental in the research and development effort, and also the product development effort that got us to where we are today. So we'll have all of these people standing by should we run across any questions that I'm not able to answer. Next slide. So this page is standard legal disclaimer. There are a lot of forward-looking statements contained in this presentation, so please do review this at your convenience, but please do so. Next page. So the concept behind Pepex Biomedical goes back about 25 years. I know there are a lot of words on this page, so I'm not gonna try to go through every single detail. You can read this also at your leisure. But next slide. So the next slide, though, this kind of hits the highlights, and in particular, there's some key moments that I want to point out. Our sister company, TheraSense, was acquired by Abbott Laboratories in 2004 for well over $1 billion. They went on and commercialized the first blood glucose product that emanated from the original research. Pepex Biomedical, on the other hand, continued down the R&D path until about 2010, perfecting the electrochemical design of our sensor. And from 2010 until today, we've been working on developing products that would be able to take advantage of this base technology. Most recently, or the original thrust was targeted towards blood glucose, but as you'll hear more about later, when the COVID pandemic came up about 1.5 years ago, knowing that we would be able to produce products that might be very useful for that market, we pivoted temporarily and initiated effort in that regard. Next slide. So basically, we solve 4 critical problems in the medical testing universe: the accuracy of results, ease of use, cost effectiveness, and connectivity, all of which are critical. And you'll hear throughout the presentation how these problems are dealt with and how our solutions will resonate. Next page. So breaking our competitive advantages into the 2 basic categories of blood glucose testing and COVID testing, which includes other viral infections. Our accuracy is going to be greater than 95%, which is significantly better than anything on the market currently in the self-test arena. We approach, if not achieving the same level of accuracy that you would in a laboratory. The product, the first product, the M-Trio, which we'll hear more about, is very simple to use. It's basically painless, and you can use it anywhere under your skin. Cost effectiveness wise, because of our business model, which we'll go into later, is going to save a tremendous amount of money for the insurance providers, which is key to our business model. And the device will be connected as an Internet of Things to the web, so that the results from tests are transmitted in real time to all those that have a stake in the patient's outcome. In terms of COVID-19, there was a rush when the disease was, or the virus was first detected, for a lot of companies that applied for emergency use authorization through the FDA. But generally speaking, there weren't too many competitors that actually popped out. We'll talk about those later. But in terms of how we compare to them, our testing accuracy is going to be significantly higher. Again, the ease of use, the antigen test is going to use saliva, which precludes the necessity to use the nasal swab. It's going to be very inexpensive, the least expensive solution currently on the market. And again, with the connectivity potential, that provides a lot of other advantages. Next slide. So now I'd like to introduce Joe Stryver, who's our Chief Financial Officer, who's going to discuss the market potential we have for each of the products that we're going to present today. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And Roy, thank you for hosting this for us today. I'm going to spend just a minute and talk about what we would consider low-hanging fruit. So once Pepex, made this huge transition from an R&D company and developing biosensors into deciding that we are going to develop products and turning ourselves into a product development company, well, the question was, okay, what are the markets that we're going after? Because the broad base of our technology means we literally could have gone after hundreds. But we selected these markets. They're very easily identifiable. And obviously, they each has their own benefits in terms of revenue potential and market share. And to the right, the column is showing what state of readiness Pepex believes it is in with each of these products in terms of having it ready to go into full commercialization. Now, diabetes we focused on because we could. I mean, it was the elephant in the room. It's a huge market and growing. Everybody understands the diabetic market. And of course, because of our history of development with TheraSense, that ultimately, as Paul says, was acquired by Abbott Pharmaceuticals and became Abbott Diabetes Care and their Freestyle system. Because of our joint venture with them in development of the technology, we knew that we could come up with a better system than we even did before. So that obviously is first. Then COVID, gained a great deal of attention. Obviously, we all know why, and it's not going away. And we'll talk about more of the market opportunity for that later. But we just wanted you to see what we feel like are the significant products that we can bring to market relatively quickly, and why we're focused on those two as our market entry points. Thanks. So if you go to the next slide. If we can, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Bupp and let him explain a little bit more about the specifics of the two markets that we're focused on going into.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So everybody can hear?
Yeah,
Yes.
fine.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. So one of the interesting things about diabetes, number one, from a medical perspective, this is almost a nearly preventable disease. You can measure the number of patients. You can measure the number of tests needed. You can measure the money spent. You can measure the money saved. I like the measure of who we think has the disease, and the reason is outlined by bullet point 3 here on the left. Half the people don't know they have the disease, and so when you're looking at numbers of tests and money spent, it's a gross underrepresentation. On the right side in this graphic is one of my favorite things, which is, a decade ago when they made projections, they were wrong. 5 years into the projections, they were already wrong by 25 million individuals. And this is just looking at estimated number of people that have the disease. Those 25 million people that they underestimated represent another 27 billion tests per year. So the numbers get really big on this. Next slide. So the other way that they do look at it is talking about, test strips and lancets, both techniques which we plan to usurp with the mTrio blood glucose device. These test strips represent a growing market, and they represent 97% of the market, as opposed to continuous blood glucose monitoring, which is a tinier 3% of the market. Next slide. When you shift gears to COVID, it's new enough that we don't know enough to say things like how many people have this disease and how many people are going to get this disease. And I say it that way because with HIV, we do know how many people are going to get this disease ongoing. With COVID, we don't know that, but here's some numbers just on the testing done in July. Worldwide, it's a quarter of a billion. In the United States alone, it's 21 million. And what we do know, as a frequent question, is, COVID's going to go away, right? Well, as a physician dealing with this for the last couple of years, I just want to remind you that these are the things that didn't prevent COVID or make it go away. Travel restrictions, distancing, masks, goggles, shutting down economies, testing, vaccination. None of these things have prevented, right? You're still seeing a surge with a variant. Next slide. When it does come to making money on COVID, there's no question, as Abbott revealed here, with a 63% boost in second quarter. Next slide. And the last thing is just how competitive can we be with test pricing. So the current test, the quick and easy test is the Binox now from Abbott Labs. This is an antigen test. You get 2 of them for $24, so they're running about $12. Our test will be, in that range or less. And I mention that test specifically because I want you all to hear me say that test has a sensitivity of 46%, which means if you're negative, you can flip a coin. All right, I'd like to introduce Patrick again, the Chief Information Officer, for the next slide.
Thank you, Dr. Bupp. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. I want to take a minute here to talk about big data. So big data is generally defined as a large set of complex data which can be effectively used to uncover deep insights and solve problems that could not be tackled before with conventional analytics or software. In Pepex's case, data collected by mTrio, our blood glucose monitor, will become a significant and very valuable data set. We will collect and merge this data from our glucose testing device in a HIPAA-compliant cloud service, eventually consisting of hundreds of terabytes of information. This data will be used to improve clinical decisions, support analytics, and increase the revenue stream for healthcare organizations. Now back to Paul Danner, CEO.
Thanks, Patrick. So in terms of competitors, and blood glucose, probably the ones, the companies that people are most familiar with are both Abbott and Dexcom. Both have very large marketing expenditures, both advertise on television, both are focused on the continuous monitoring market, which as Dr. Bupp stated earlier, or only represents about 3% of the total market, which is why we're going to focus initially on the single stick market. And there are others certainly in the single stick arena as well, but the advantages that we have, which I'll get into in a moment, pretty much preclude them as being considered true competitors. In terms of COVID-19, back 3 or 4 months ago, Dr. Long, who I introduced earlier, did an exhaustive study of all the companies that have applied for EUA approval from the FDA. The top 3 that have surfaced, Abbott is probably the clear market leader, as Dr. Bupp just pointed out with their product. But the biggest problem with the product is not necessarily the cost; it's the accuracy level. Elum also was recognized in the press for a very large order they received from the U.S. government that was nearly $250 million. And LabCorp is also another viable competitor, as well as a couple of others. But the vast majority sort of came and went and were not really considered competitors at this time. Next slide. So in comparison to those previously mentioned competitors, I won't go through and read this. A lot of this is somewhat redundant from our solution to the problems that we address, but just keep in mind the enhanced care, especially in blood glucose, the most important thing, the most important factor to achieve is superior test results, which are going to make the patient's longevity improve, considerably. In our case, with our accuracy, there's not going to be anything that will be compared to this. Between the improved outcomes and enhanced care, the reduced cost is also critical. And when we get into the business case analysis, we'll get more into this, but just suffice it to say that the way that we will go to market is going to be provide a very cost-effective solution, and it essentially creates a win-win-win situation for the patient, the caregiver, the insurance provider, as well as Pepex. Moving on to COVID-19 test solutions, as Dr. Bupp just mentioned, will be at or below the Abbott product with much higher accuracy. The products both will be very simple to use, as I mentioned earlier. One of the major advantages that we have, though, is that the products, both the antigen and antibody, are completely self-contained. Don't require any healthcare professional, no additional analysis outside. The patient gets the result right away. If everybody could go on mute, it would be helpful, probably. The speed with which we deliver
Paul, I think you need to unmute there.
Okay, thanks. I think you did that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Mute. That's okay.
Yeah.
I figured that out when I got a big error message. Anyway, our precision, as you can see there, is outstanding, and the one of the things that is really critical is now that we've developed the chemistry and verified that we can manufacture this using our proprietary techniques, we can adjust this in a very rapid time period to address any other viruses, including mutants of the current COVID-19 virus. Next slide. I'd like to reintroduce Dr. Bupp, who now is going to talk about how our biosensor technology works and the applications that we're going to pursue. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's actually fun to hear you talk about our competitors, because for the first time I kind of thought, yeah, Abbott and Dexcom are both using the same patents from our portfolio that are shared, and they are the competitors because it's about the property. So our biosensor use cases divide up into 3 categories. This is just in terms of the way we look at things. On the left side, we have enzymatic sensors that can do things like blood glucose or lactic acid. Each of these have huge markets and applications, and we'll talk about the sensors themselves. And the middle is the pivot. We had intended to do antibody and antigen a few years down the line, to be honest, but with the help of Dr. Long, we were able to find a generous influx of money and set up a system to go after this in the last few months, which was really great. And then on the right side is controlled substances, but this also includes such things as looking for toxicity in food services and other monitoring, the sensors and monitor. Next slide. Well, the key thing here is that, this is an electrochemical test. And so it's not amplification. It's not about fluorescence. It's an electrochemical test, which has certain definite advantages. And one of the problems with electrochemical tests historically had to be with size and ease of use. So spending a number of years to develop the patented CCM technology, which is a carbon conductive monofilament, and we're going to make that into an electrode. And we're going to put 3 of them inside of a 28 gauge needle. So these electrodes are the size of human hair, and the needle, a 28 gauge needle, is 0.3 millimeters. This picture you're looking at on the right side is 10 times bigger, so you can see it. We ran across something fun yesterday. The mosquito proboscis is 0.1 millimeter. So our needle is 3 times bigger than a mosquito. And if you like mechanical pencils, the mechanical pencil has a 0.5 millimeter. So this needle is about half that size. So these are really tiny electrodes that go inside a needle. The benefit of the needle is that it does the lancing, it acquires the sample, and there's 0 error with that technique. So this module leads to a number of different products. So on the left side, we have single point testing like the M-Trio for diabetes and the COVID test. We have button style that could be used for continuous monitoring. Those are both lancing sensors with the sensor inside the needle. And then there's many applications that don't need a needle because they're in a catheter or they're in an IV line. And I'm going to show you our diabetes product next. Next slide. Hi, my name is Dr. Stephen Bupp, and I am the Medical Director for Pepex Biomedical. I would like to introduce to you the M-Trio, a new generation of diabetes management that combines real-time interactive glycemic control with high-accuracy, blood droplet-free testing.
We all know diabetics are currently required to prick a finger and draw blood. A painful regimen, especially for elderly patients and children, and one that consistently produces totally inaccurate results. M-Trio solves this problem once and for all. Can you imagine a world where our diabetic friends and family never have to prick their finger again? In fact, never have to handle test strips at all, or carry around lancets and other cumbersome supplies. Let us show you just how M-Trio works. The diabetic user slides Pepex's proprietary cartridge with 20 sensors into the meter, and it automatically connects to the cloud, greets the user, and displays the results of the last test. Then with one button ease of use, hold M-Trio to your skin and press start. The test is performed by a self-contained Pepex sensor module requiring no blood droplet or separate lancet device, producing a virtually painless test in less than 3 seconds. The M-Trio has the ability to transmit the data to your physician. With continued use, the M-Trio system will be seamlessly gathering critical data, connecting clinicians with patients, and empowering diabetics to better understand and proactively manage their own health. At the same time, it enables clinicians who can intervene in a patient's health management to monitor this vital information instead of waiting for an office visit or worse, hospitalization. This allows physicians to manage patient care far more effectively. Diabetics currently use all of these products in order to test glucose levels. This technology replaces all of these. Pepex's revolutionary lancing sensor technology penetrates the skin to a sufficient depth, automatically taking its reading while still in the tissue. Diabetic users never see or handle any sharps or test strips, and up to 20 disposable glucose tests are contained in a single-use snap-in cartridge. Combined with the latest M2M and wireless communications, M-Trio is the ideal cloud-based solution for all self-testing diabetics. Pepex is moving toward manufacturing and expects FDA approval in the very near future. That's where you come in. Help us change and improve the lives of all diabetics to live longer, happier, and healthier lives by raising capital to launch M-Trio in the U.S.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I always like when my own video presentation makes me want to invest. That's great. So to summarize this, though, the important parts, the sensors are in the needle, the test is in the tissue, and this was the model for the M-Trio with diabetes, but the applications for this include things like HIV, Ebola, other viral infections, and you can tell this was an old slide before COVID even. And alcohol and drug testing. So this lancing sensor is a critical component. Next slide. Here's concepts of our COVID products. On the top is the antigen sensor. We're not going after nasopharyngeal. The electrochemistry ability is really sensitive. And so we think with the saliva, which comes in early, that's a better way to detect this. We'll also be able to use a filter which manages some of the problems that other tests have. And again, this will be self-contained, just like the M-Trio, but no lancing sensor. The antibody biosensor is basically the M-Trio in a smaller size with different chemistry, and is, again, a lancing sensor that'll be able to detect antibodies to COVID, as well as other HIV, Ebola, other viral infections going forward. So again, testing in tissue on the antibody biosensor. Next slide. Just want to show you some of the other products. So that technology is related, is capable with the lancing piece and the needle to go into a button sensor. And that's why both Dexcom and Abbott have used this for continuous blood glucose. The only people that have actionable blood glucose information use the same technology that we have patents on. Next slide. I mentioned the lactic acid monitor as an inline sensor or a button. We know for sepsis, and we know for pregnancy monitoring fetuses that lactic acid levels are really important. We have products that could be either inline or in a button patch that would continuously monitor that. And again, when you look at the numbers that Mr. Driver presented, the number of people admitted that have sepsis is another huge number. Next slide. Next is in line. So when people go to the hospital in North America, at least 70 to 90% of them get an intravenous line. And so there's all sorts of opportunities in hospital diagnostics. And within, you see like an IV line here, where we have a system that puts a sensor in that line and allows us to monitor things such as, blood sugars or trim for oxygen or other things. Multiple applications at the bottom. Next slide. And outside of lactic acid, the same applies for the sensor module with without this lancing sensor being available inside an IV line. Next slide is going to talk about accuracy. So the last two things, accuracy and speed. This is the data from handmade sensors for the M-Trio. And I emphasize handmade because it's really difficult to be consistent as you're building things by hand. We found a 98% accuracy versus a standard lab test. And this graphic just shows that the y-axis is the number from our meter. The x-axis, the standard blood glucose, is from what they call a YSI analyzer, but it's a standard lab test in hospitals. You're looking for a slope near 1. You're looking for that to go through the 0.00. And critically for Pepex is that these accuracies are both at the lower end as well as the higher end above 300. And that higher end has been a problem for a lot of the blood glucose devices, which we can overcome. Next is speed. Well, you have to be an electrochemist to understand the left side of this. So let me just tell you that the way this is designed is that this is acquire sample and test in about 6.5 seconds for really fast results. And if you do like graphics and you look at the red lines, there's there's 3.5 seconds during the incubation, then there's the polarization that happens, and then there's 3 seconds in the analysis phase to get to the 6.5 seconds. So that's how it's quick. Next slide. I thought I'd put up a really complicated patent slide to kind of impress everybody. The truth is we have over 302 patents, including licensed and applications. Some of those go back to the time with TheraSense, even before Abbott. And most of the ones that we're touting now, however, on the next slide, involve our most recent patents, which are solely Pepex patents. There's been eight approvals throughout 5 global domains in the last 16, 18 months. These patents protect our current method of manufacturing using aerosol jet printing processes. We're actually printing electrodes in methods for manufacturing for inserting the 3 electrodes in a needle. One of our patents covers which side of the fiber you print on. And there's a fluid management patent that's critical for the Lansing sensor because the interstitial fluid does not just go up in there like it's supposed to. So the bottom line with these last 8 patents in 5 domains is that no one else can do what we can do. I'd like to introduce Joe Driver again, our CFO, for the next slide.
Thanks, Doc. I'm going to talk a little bit about the regulatory process. And of course, we have Ritz on the call. If later on there's some questions regarding this. And I'm just going to give a very global overview. And I say doc, I should say Dr. Butt, since we've got a lot of other PhDs and doctors on the call with us. But the overview from a businessman's perspective is simply this. A lot of people are confused about the FDA process and how complex it is. We've simplified this down, particularly for our products. We've worked with the FDA for quite a while, and we've worked through our regulatory experts for several years. And so this is kind of a side-by-side relationship that you do as your development goes forward. And it includes multiple stages. First, for the Trio device, is to do a series of investigational device exemptions under the FDA guidelines. So basically, we are going to the FDA and we are telling them, here's what we'd like to do and why this is going to be safe to do it. And then we begin doing testings, and particularly, it lets us begin the process of clinical studies. So with Trio, we have completed the first IDE and using the Lansing sensor, and use that to test our sample acquisition and signal reliability. And we have built into our timeline 2 additional IDEs, but my understanding from our scientists are we may ultimately end up combining IDE number 2 and 3 together because of the early successes in testing of our device, which is fantastic. That'll help speed up the timeline and spend less money. But in those IDs, obviously, we're looking for something a little different. Now we're doing a human factor study, form factor. In other words, can left-handed people use it as well as right-handed? Is the display easy to read? Those kind of things. And then included in that is testing of our production parts. You heard Dr. Bupp mention a little bit ago that currently we're doing our testing using handmade sensors. Well, that's not going to work for our FDA process and our FDA submission. So we will have to demonstrate our automation system for making these sensor modules, which is a key point. So in our final stages of IDEs, of the IDE program, we will be using the low volume automation system to demonstrate to the FDA our automation process. We expect that process to build out the low volume pilot production system to take about 12 weeks. And then after that, we will produce, I don't know, I think it's 50,000 parts a week for like 5 weeks. And those will go to various places, like back to Dr. Long's lab and for Dr. Spavoda to test and do a number of things with. We will then be sending them back to our engineering group to do studies regarding tolerances to make sure number 10,000 is as perfect as number 1, things like that. So there's a whole testing regime that goes with that. Once that is complete, then we can go directly to the FDA for make a 510K submission, which is based primarily upon predicated devices. And as you heard mentioned earlier, we easily meet that bar because, again, the base technology, at least the chemistry is well known, and many of the technology applications that we jointly own with Abbott Pharmaceuticals or Abbott Diabetes together are already used in commercial devices. So the bottom line is our 510K or FDA submission and approval process is very straightforward, and we know the path. And again, we've been working with FDA and our FDA consultants and quality management people for quite some time to make sure that we're on track always for this process. Almost simultaneously with the medical application for a 510K, we will follow with a request for a 510K for where we demonstrate the device's big data capabilities to show that we're HIPAA compliant and that our communications process in the cloud meet those requirements. But we will do that somewhat in tandem with the final 510K process. And again, the whole thing is pretty straightforward. Next slide. Now, on COVID-19, it's a little bit different path for us in terms of our approach. It does not negate the fact that ultimately, at some point, like every company, we'll still have to do an FDA submission process, and this too will be a 510K. But prior to that, as everybody knows the term, the emergency use authorization program is still in effect, and we have been through Maritza been engaging with preliminary dialogue with the FDA to seek out whether or not our product would meet the requirements for an emergency use authorization. We've received some responses regarding that, and the response from the FDA is that yes, our product would likely meet the requirements to be granted an emergency use, but that means that we would have to submit to them functional prototypes, and we can do that. That's part of our schedule here, and it's about a 6-week process where we could get to a point where we'd be able to go back to have additional meetings with the FDA regarding an EUA approval using our prototypes. So we're working currently with a company called Insight Product Development, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, for optimizing the form factor of the final devices of our COVID product so that we can then go back to the FDA and seek that approval. But again, throughout that process, I'll remind everybody that it does not negate the fact that we will still, even after commercialization perhaps, have to go through a 510K approval process. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the key stakeholders in this that are helping us accomplish those tasks. It's not just FDA approval, but obviously the design for manufacturing process is critical. Building the pilot production system we talked about that lets us demonstrate automation to the FDA, and our high volume assembly manufacturing processes and partners in that for actual commercialization, and of course our logistics partners for distribution. So I'm going to take a minute and talk about each one of these. Next slide, please. Now, we've been working for years with a company called Insight Product Development. They are, premier in this world of doing design for manufacturing, and it's a critical piece to our development process. They take all of Pepex's concepts, drawings, ideas, technology, and scoop it all up into a barrel, and it's their job to then convert that into a fully manufacturable design under FDA guidance and guidelines. And throughout that process, help us maintain what is known as by the FDA as a design history file. So we've been working with them for quite some time. The good news is that their parent company is Nemera Medical, who is the device manufacturer. And we're going to talk about them a little bit more in a minute. Next slide. Now, one of our other partners is Micron Manufacturing. Micron is tasked with building the machines to our specifications, both for the pilot production system and for our high-speed assembly. And they work very closely with Insight. These companies have very long, years of working relationships. And so their collaboration, along with Pepex designing the specifications, creates a real smooth process to our pilot production line and to our high-speed assembly process. Next slide, please. I mentioned Nemera a little bit ago. Nemera is a world leader in manufacturing of biotechnology devices, just like ours. And the relationship between Insight Product Development and Nemera means that we are going to have a very seamless handoff to our full-scale manufacturing process. So ultimately, our products will be manufactured and assembled in a Class 8 clean room facility owned by them, and the machines are owned by us, have been built by Micron, and then they will go directly to our logistics partner. Next slide, please. Now, we've been in discussions for quite some time with UPS, and Steve Habrick, our Chief Operating Officer, has been leading that charge. And there's a couple things to know here, that it's not just that they would be sending this, mailing these out to the ultimate consumer. There's a whole lot in this in terms of logistics. So our products would arrive at UPS's facilities directly from the assembly unit at Nemera, and UPS would then be handling a number of different tasks. First is sterilization. Obviously, before people can use this or put this into their arm, any of these, or put it, with our COVID device, put it in their mouth, these got to be sterilized. So they would handle the sterilization at the UPS center. Then there's a couple of other things with our M-Trio. There's in order for it to be cloud connected, it's going to have to be flashed, as they would call it, before it goes out the door. So we know who's getting that meter and can track it, with every single use that user uses it. So and then of course they become a critical part in the overall supply chain and managing our inventory, as well as our packaging solution. So it's a much bigger problem. They also would be handling the ongoing reporting process to the FDA. So batch testing processes and reports that have to be done ongoing to the FDA, even after commercialization. So obviously, all of these partnerships we see as key stakeholders, and each one of them has huge financial commitments to Pepex to be a key supplier for us. Next slide, please. Now, to summarize this, Pepex has a lot of traction in terms of its ready-to-market strategy. Our IP portfolio, which addresses a number of things, including our unique manufacturing processes, the regulatory approval process and FDA status that I shared with you, the product form factor and design being done with our partners at Insight Product Development, and our manufacturing requirements fully designed or defined that Micron is building the automation system with and completing our pilot production, and then of course our logistic partners at UPS. Next slide, please. So with all that kind of put together in a box, then we can talk about what's the use cases for each of these devices. We'll start with the M-Trio. And there's a couple of things I want to point out. I'm not going to read this whole page, but I want to point out that we've been in negotiations and talking with several insurance payers for the last several years regarding the M-Trio product. And in one case, we had one payer that literally wanted to monopolize our entire production capability. And we felt like that was probably not the best idea. It was a little bit too much like being owned by them without them having to pay for us. So what we did was we negotiated with multiple insurance companies and came up with some reasonable scale out processes. Initially, those payers, the three that we selected, wanted us to be able to do 10,000 new users per month. And we went back to all of our stakeholders that I just mentioned and asked reasonably, could we really do 30,000 brand new users, all testing 3, 5, 6 times a day with our device, and do it that from out of the gate? And we really came back and said, no, we really can't. So what we negotiated with them is that instead of 30,000, we would do 20,000 new users per month and scale at about 10% increase per year. Represented when we get into the numbers later, we'll see what that really represents in terms of market share and dollars. But the point being is that our device, we know that the insurance companies want. We know that by their own models, that our device will save them $9,300 per year per diabetic. And there's a simple answer for why it's that much money. Because simply said, when one diabetic gets sick, it costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they know that. So their goal is to get to these diabetics much earlier and help guide a compliance that's better than it is now. And with true, actionable data, be able to intervene before these people get sick. So they know what the value of a product like Pepex is. And that's why we were so easily able to negotiate such tremendous terms with them on our subscription-based model, which this is. And that's something that no other product has done, is an actual subscription-based model. So while this may look like a blade razor blade, it really is a subscription. The insurance company is going to tell us on the first of the month who needs our product. We're going to ship it to them. They automatically go into our system, and then the insurance company pays us on a monthly basis based on what the subscription for that user is. So, obviously this creates a lot of financial incentives for everybody involved. It creates financial incentives to the insurance company. I mean, that's just a no-brainer how much money this saves them, and they realize that. And of course, the model for us has a lot of benefits in terms of, being able to sidetrack the normal expense that goes with extraordinary costs of marketing and advertising and selling to an end user. So this is how we plan to bring the M Trio to market, and that's our business use case for that. Next slide, please. Wasn't there a business case for COVID too? Or did we miss that? Oh, we're going to talk.
You haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, I'm just out of order. All right. Well, so I know I'm kind of talking on and on about this a little bit, but a lot of people don't understand that, this product is the first one because of the level of accuracy we can provide, and because it's connected in real time. We're the first company that's ever going to have truly actionable data. So I'm just going to give you an image to think about. If you think about a little girl at school, a 10-year-old girl at school who has diabetes and gets tested. Okay, at lunchtime. Well, what happens to that information? Where's it go? Well, this is accurate enough. It actually will. The school nurse will know where, what her blood sugar reading is. Her parents, both at work, will get a copy of it. Her physician will know immediately what's going on. So our device would even inevitably have the ability in an emergency to dial 911 for you. And of course, then there's the long-term benefits of being able to provide that kind of a service. So again, this is actionable data in the cloud, and it's real-time and immediate. Next slide, please. Now, what we call that is not just the Pepex Cloud, but it's the caregiver circle. So on our platform, you're going to have someone take a test, just as you saw in the video, and that information is going to go immediately to everybody that is in this person's caregiver circle, whether that's the endocrinologist or primary care, family caregivers, dietitians, as I said, health coaches, the nurse at school, parents, keep going. It's anybody that's in the caregiver circle, because many times, even an adult diabetic, the diabetic himself may be compromised in terms of their health. And it's other people that need to know this information and need to know it rapidly, not a week from today, not, as it's digested over 90 days, but now. So the device, the doctor could see a trend over a period of time that sends up flags and says, oh, and your device will actually send you notice, and everybody in the caregiver circle will get it too. Say, I don't like what I'm seeing. Let's get you back into the office for another visit. Now, beyond that, then is what do you do with this huge amount of big data? As Patrick Doherty talked, our big data is on itself, a business all in and of itself, and deserves a whole nother presentation. But bottom line is, because we'll know who your doctor is, what other medications you're on, what your blood sugar reading, and we aren't necessarily releasing that information about who you are by name. But once this data is collected, we'll be able to use that to help improve outcomes. We'll be able to do drug management with it. So pharmacy, medicine, genetics, even insulin companies, they will all want this data. And in fact, we've had many pseudo partners that would wish to be our partner in big data, but at this point we have not selected anyone we want to own our own big data, and that has other ramifications later. But when you put this all together, it's a whole package. It's not just a piece, it's a whole package of real-time actionable data, and we're the first company to really be able to do that. Next slide, please. There's our COVID-19 business model. So the idea behind this is that, there's the yes, no question, if you want. So the antigen device that you'll basically not be putting up your nose. You're not going to do anything like that. You're just going to put it in your mouth like a thermometer for a while, and you're going to find out yes, no, that the disease that you've been infected or not, and that you're currently infected. And that's a pretty simple idea, right? And that's kind of where the market's been focused, which tends to take away from where the big picture really is, and that is long term. How many, what level of antibodies are in your bloodstream and maintained in your bloodstream? When do you need a booster shot? Do you have a certain kind of variant? All these other things that we know that the antibody product can do. The idea of, wearing masks, if you know in the office, whether or not someone has the antibodies or not, is much more beneficial to you and whether or not they can contract or spread the disease is then just a simple yes, no, which is a one-time thing. And you can, still contract the virus later that afternoon. But an antibody test has much broader reach and applications. So again, our target for the product isn't necessarily the end consumer at this point. In other words, it's not our goal to go put this in every pharmacy at this point. We know that the government and insurance companies are going to want this product to literally going to consume everything we can make and beyond that. So we're not worried about where can we sell the product. We already know where our market is. And the distribution through those sources is going to be much easier and provide a much better use case for the COVID-19 as a business model. Next slide, please. Now, I know this slide's a little bit complicated, and you're probably wearing everybody out, but I thought I'd show you just kind of overall what the critical milestones in the development process are and what the cost associated it is to reach each of those. So I'm not going to go through everything here. Paul's going to talk about use of funds in a little bit anyway, but this just kind of gives you an idea where we are at and where we plan to spend the money for the capital raise we're doing. Next slide, please. The financials, the thing that most interests investors. So there's a couple of things I'd like to point out on this slide. One is, if you notice in year one, there's no M-Trio numbers. Since we're focused on bringing the COVID products to market first and can do that much more rapidly, we believe we won't be introducing the M-Trio product until year two. And so that's why you don't see any revenue from that till the second year. The next thing I would like to point out is some of the obvious. The gross profit margins are exceptional, in terms of a business model, and our revenue growth, particularly in the first 3 years, is phenomenal. And at the end of that, to have an $800+ billion EBITDA in year 5 is pretty hard for most startup companies to achieve. But we can get there, and we do it not just because we say we can, or we're taking these numbers and doing some odd projections. I'll go back just a little bit to the fact that what the insurance payers wanted with the M-Trio, we knew we could not make as many as they wanted. We couldn't even hit what they wanted us to do initially in terms of monthly new users at 30,000. We pared it back to 20,000 with an annual increase of 10%. And when you're done at the end of 5 years, what that represents still is less than 4% of US market share. So it's not like we've put some pie in the sky numbers together. This is what we knew the insurance companies would work with us and accept, and it's the maximum number we can produce and scale out reasonably, at least in one market being the US. Whether or not, when we could begin to duplicate those markets in other places, well, that's still a question. Then you have the COVID products. And as Dr. Butt mentioned earlier, these are not just for COVID-19, which is continuing to grow. The need for a test, both for antibody and antigen tests, are not going to go away. But Pepex looks at this more as an antibody antigen line of products, because as Paul Danner mentioned, there's a number of other places, whether it's HIV, another Ebola, or the next version of a virus that comes out that we haven't put a name on yet. So Pepex has always known that it would develop an antibody antigen line of tests. COVID is the one that's getting all the focus right now, but we know as a market, this is not going away. So again, we think that these numbers are extremely conservative in terms of market share of these kind of testing devices. And I think that we are looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 2% domestic tests to get to these numbers. So again, we're not asking investors to believe in a pie in the sky process, but rather things that we know are achievable based on what we know we can do scaling out. And in fact, we already know from our negotiations with the payers of these devices that they would buy way more if we could produce them. But scaling out and getting into a full-scale manufacturing, there has to be a reasonable approach to that, and that's the way we approach these numbers as well. So I know you can digest these numbers as you want, and then we're happy to answer questions. Next slide. And for this, I'm going to turn it back over to Paul to get into the nitty-gritty of what we're trying to do with this capital raise.
Thanks, Joe. So you've heard about the product, the technology, where we are, the traction that we've achieved. And so the purpose of the presentation today is we're currently offering $9.5 million US in common equity for sale at a share price of $23.45, which is exactly the same valuation as the last $7.75 million has been raised over the last 5 to 7 years. So no big jump in valuation, exactly the same. We just need the use of funds, which I'll get into in just a second. Also of note, if you examine the timeline, you'll see that there's a key milestone that indicates that we are planning to do an initial public offering on a national market in the US, probably near the end of the first quarter in 2022. We have already initiated the process to engage a well-known investment banking entity based in New York. The purpose of the IPO will be to generate funding, which we know will need in additional working capital to purchase the high-speed manufacturing equipment. And as a side benefit, obviously, it would offer a liquidity event for investors, which is obviously of interest. So you can see the breakdown on the use of proceeds from this raise. The majority, more than 50%, is going to finish the various product development efforts and finish the FDA regulatory requirements to seek approval. The balance is divided another large share into SG&A. We're going to have to hire people and obviously set up facilities in order to hit the revenue goals that Joe just summarized. And then we have an allowance for general working capital and also a specific amount set aside for the professional fees that are associated with completing an initial public offering, mostly accounting and legal efforts. Next slide. So this is a snapshot of our current capitalization and who owns what. What the slide doesn't indicate is we have a very clean balance sheet. We have no debt. All the money that's been raised to date, you can see nearly $23 million has been early on through friends and family and later on through more sophisticated angel investors, but it's all been in the form of common equity. Next slide. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. Again, I've listed the leadership team, which I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. Rather, I'm not going to go down the list and read it again, but everyone here that's listed here is on the call right now, so they will be available. As I said, if one of us is not able to answer a specific question, we have all the A-team subject matter experts here. So, next slide. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I think we went a little bit over the time that we had targeted, but as you can see, there's been a lot of activity that has been gone into getting us where we are today. It's kind of a long story to tell because there's so many good attributes that need to be examined, but we appreciate your time. Our contact numbers listed. And at this point, I'd like to thank Roy for setting up the call, and we will open the call up for any questions that anybody may have.
Thank you. Anyone have questions?
Can I ask about the data? I just have a question about the data.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's quite interesting what you're saying. Of course, we can have another conversation at a different time. But,
Okay.
I mean, we have a company here based in London, and we also have a second office in New York. So what we do is we focus on basically monetizing data. So what we do is you sort of rent data sets. And what we do is we basically, organize them, make them ready, and then we basically supply them to all the different quantitative hedge funds. So we have a relationship with all the big hedge funds in Mayfair in New York. So of course, it's a deeper conversation, but
Yes.
On the surface, it looks like there could be a lot of synergy here, especially because the type of data you might have could be quite interesting to certain funds.
Probably a future.
Yeah, well, thanks, Abdul. I appreciate that question. You see on the last slide here our contact information. If you'd like to, I think that sounds like a deeper conversation than probably for this venue. But we would love to. We probably would very much appreciate exploring that possibility.
Perfect.
And I'll add to that to say that certainly we have all the numbers to reflect what our projections are on number of tests per day, number of users over time, and what we would call reoccurring issues for data as well. And we'll draw into those conversations. So we'd be delighted to get into that with you, and think that the potential synergies could be great.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, what I will do is I will send out the deck to everyone. And of course, if you come up with more questions, you can just email us and we'll deal with it.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And Roy, thanks for hosting this for us.
Thank you for a great presentation. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
All right, everybody, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.